Here are 12 fights that taught me a lot about fighting. If you're a serious martial artist, your study of combat has to go beyond the dojo, the gym, or the salle d'armes. For the moment, I'm not going to tell you why I think these 12 fights are important or what lessons they have to teach. I may give you a hint. But I want you to go in cold, without any preconceptions based on anything I might say. I may tell my students where to look, but I never tell them what to see. Thus let it be with Caesar. Now, I'm not saying you should only study these 12 fights. There are hundreds and hundreds of others, and every one of them will teach you something if you're not careful. But you have to start someplace, and I consider these really classics you can't do without. Think of it like studying English literature. You know, if you haven't read Melville, you don't know Dick. Before I give you my top 12 list, I'll tell you how I go about analyzing fights, and maybe it'll help you, but you don't have to do it my way. Before you begin your analysis, first, identify your own biases. If you're looking at the American Civil War, you're going to see things differently if you conceive of it as the war between the states, or the war for Southern independence, or the war to abolish slavery, or the war to save the Union, or the war of Northern aggression. One man's hero is another man's traitor. Try to go in with a tabula rasa as much as you can, and try to be aware of when you can't. There are 3 variables you should assess: the nature of the fighter, the nature of the opponent, and the nature of the environment. The first variable is the nature of the fighter. Now, you have to start someplace, so pick one side or the other. You're going to analyze the fight from both sides' points of view, so it doesn't matter much which one you start with. We usually say the fighter and the opponent, but you might designate them protagonist and antagonist, or combatant A and combatant B, or whatever you like. Just don't use good guys and bad guys, or you might as well stay home. The nature of the fighter includes every aspect of his physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual makeup. The physical aspect includes height, weight, strength, how many there are, how are they armed, and what is their disposition. I don't mean are they grumpy, I mean where are they situated. The mental aspect includes such things as intelligence, both inherent and gathered, training, and experience. The emotional aspect is about the type and level of emotional arousal and whether it complements or just complicates the fighter's efforts. The spiritual aspect is related to motivation, the fighter's goal or purpose. It's the why behind his what. The second variable is the nature of the opponent. You take that list you just made for the first combatant and make the same list for the other one: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. The third variable is the nature of the environment. This includes the physical environment, terrain and weather, and the socio-political environment, that is, the cultural meaning and import of the fight. Now, after you compile all your data for the fighter, the opponent, and the environment, the next step is to compare and contrast the various aspects of the combatants in relationship to each other and to the environment. Once you have this all sorted out, you go through the fight from beginning to end, from the fighter's point of view, seeing the fight as he sees it, consistent with the way he sees the world. Try to get into his skin, have a shot of his Kool-Aid. Imagine fighting his fight, his way, for his reasons. And then go back and do the exact same thing from the other combatant's point of view. You may have to go back and do this process more than once. You may have a lot of questions. The fun is figuring out the answer if you can. Every question you answer will raise another question. What was the outcome of the fight? Why was that the outcome? Was it predictable? What things might have changed the outcome? Now, the more you do this, the better you get at it. You'll learn to recognize patterns, and history is nothing if not repeating patterns. Okay, without further ado about anything, here are 12 fights I think every martial artist ought to study, and I'll try to keep my witty commentary to a minimum. If you want a PhD in hopolology, you could do it just focusing on the sweet science. And Muhammad Ali's fights are like a master class. The first 3 fights on my list are classic boxing matches, and no surprise, one of Ali's fights is at the top of the list. Number 1, Ali v. Foreman, 1974. That's the Rumble in the Jungle, famous for the rope-a-dope and for the aftermath. Number 2, Foreman v. Moorer, 1994. The return of the reinvented George Foreman. This is why they call boxing the theater of the unexpected. Compare and contrast Foreman in 1974 with Foreman in 1994. Odysseus has got nothing on Big George. Number 3, Douglas v. Tyson, 1990, possibly the biggest upset in boxing history. How did the emotional, spiritual aspect influence the outcome? Of all the significant battles of the ancient world, the Battle of Thermopylae has become popularly well known, at least the legend. What's history and what's Hollywood? How did the physical environment influence this event? Number 5, the Battle of Isandlwana and the defense of Roarkes Drift. Now I put these two together because the defense of Roarkes Drift is really a continuation of the Battle of Isandlwana. Compare and contrast Thermopylae and Roarkes Drift. What's the same? What's different? Speaking of Isandlwana, compare and contrast with number 6, the Battle of the Greasy Grass, aka the Battle of the Little Bighorn. What's the role of hubris in this fight? Is there a lesson here about underestimating your opponent? Number 7, Stalingrad. My mama done told me when I was in knee pants, never draw one card to fill an inside straight. Never sleep with anybody who has less to lose than you do. And never, ever fight a land war in Russia in the winter. Hitler's mama apparently never told him that. Napoleon's mama didn't either. Number 8, the Spanish Armada. This was King Philip's plan for an invasion of England, and they say it sailed in the confident hope of a miracle. What was the plan? What was the flaw in the plan? Or was the plan a tapestry of flaws? Compare and contrast with number 9, the Normandy Landing in 1944, the Allies' invasion of Nazi-occupied France. A frontal assault on a fortified position. My old man could sing you a 4-letter aria about that one. Number 10, the Battle of the 100 Slain. What are the elements of the perfect ambush? How did Shunka-Witko become the locus of control of his opponent's behavior? Number 11, the Battle of Cameroon. It's one thing to fight when you think you can win. It's quite another thing to fight when you know you can't. Would you have made the same tactical choice that these legionnaires made? Why or why not? Number 12, the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. You're never more in peril than when you think you're perfectly safe. What is the danger in assuming that your opponent cannot do the impossible? Well, those are the 12 I promised you. But I'll give you one more just because 13 is my lucky number. And because this one is personal to me. World War II was my dad's war, and he fought in it. Vietnam was my war, and I fought against it. What happened at the village of My Lai on March 16, 1968, and why it happened, and what happened afterward, and what it meant, broke my heart and opened my eyes. Compare and contrast the actions of Lieutenant William Calley and those under his command with the actions of Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson and his chopper crew. To me, it's a story that defines the meaning of honor. And I guess that's all I'm going to say about that. Now, we talk a lot about universal principles that apply to all kinds of combat in all times and in all places. We talk about blood, the 5 tactical principles, the 4 positional strategies. If these principles are really universal, we should be able to spot them at work in the real world. In your study of these fights, what patterns do you find, if any? What principles can you derive, if any? Are there any principles of combat between armies that apply to combat between individuals or vice versa? If so, what are they? And what about our foundational elements, balance, line, focus, and distance? How do they relate, if they do? How do our 5 tactical principles apply? Or do they? And what about the 4 strategic positions? Yeah, this is not going to be a short answer quiz, is it? I always tell my students, the more you know about fighting, the less inclined you're going to be to do any. The more you know about fighting, the more inclined you're going to be to resolve any and all conflicts without the use of force, if such a resolution is at all possible. And if it isn't, you will use force grudgingly, judiciously, minimally, and with compassion.